So if you played the Spider-Man PS4 game, you got a pretty good look at who Mr. Negative is. And the PS4 game did him amazing justice. Really. The power set, the look, the inner demons, just how amazing and crazy Mr. Negative is overall. Even the origin was very similar. They did a great job, and I love them for it. But the comic books give Mr. Negative way more power than he really ever uses, because this guy should be doing so much more. So let's get started. The origin! The official on-the-record origin that Martin Lee gives the people of New York when he's presented with the Presidential Medal of Freedom is that he found his way to New York so that he could be with his wife. He ends up on a slave ship leaving China, and when they're close enough to the shore, many of the captives make a break for New York. But only Martin Lee survives the swim and decides to build a fortune and help the less fortunate, which he does for the people using Feast. In actuality, Mr. Negative's real name is unknown. The man known as Martin Lee worked on a slave ship, the Golden Mountain. And when everyone realizes that the ship will be found by the Coast Guard, he steals the identity of one of the dead slaves, Martin Lee, and swims to shore. But before he can catch his breath, Lee gets kidnapped by Don Silvermane, and the worst thing in the world happens to him. Lee gets experimented on alongside some other people and is injected with a drug called D-Light. The drug gives him and 2 other people their powers. Surprisingly, the other 2 people are part of the buy 2 get 1 free power discount and later become Cloak and Dagger, who play a very important role in Martin Lee's life later on. Not only is Martin Lee gifted with some amazing Dark Force powers, but he's also split from the Mr. Negative personality, and Martin Lee actually believes his own fake origin story. Now let's move on to the history. Mr. Negative is a busy-ass villain, and somehow always has his hands in everything going on. By using Feast, Negative becomes the de facto crime boss in Chinatown. Also, the Mr. Negative personality is very okay with killing. I mean, very, very comfortable with just murdering people in a very open way. And when he makes his big play in the Brand New Day storyline, Mr. Negative is already trying to gain more power in the criminal underworld by killing members of the Maggia crime family, and also the Cardinelli crime family. But I feel like people care more about the Maggias. And again, if you played the game, then this is going to sound very familiar. He tries to kill them with a weapon called Devil's Breath. And it works for the most part. It kills a lot of people. And it almost kills Spider-Man, except it was DNA specific. So Spider-Man's able to walk out. Of course, you can imagine that Mr. Negative is not exactly pleased with having the wall crawler mess up his plans. So Mr. Negative uses a little girl and gets Spider-Man to give him some of his blood. Now with Spider-Man's blood, Mr. Negative can create a DNA specific version of Devil's Breath for Spider-Man. And this almost works later on. Spider-Man is definitely almost killed by this, except he does the greatest trick in the world and he holds his breath. Oh, the secret power of Spider-Man, everybody, holding your breath. He does that and he makes it out. But it's not just trying to take over the criminal underworld. Mr. Negative is always trying to increase his power with more people to work under him. And one of the people that he gets to work for him is Hammerhead, which is very surprising because if you know anything about Hammerhead, you know that this man cares only about the people he works for. So the fact that he would switch over to Negative is amazing. Also, he would have ended up a vegetable if Negative didn't save him and give him a brand new adamantium skeleton. So that was definitely a huge part of why Hammerhead decided to switch over. And let us not forget that as Martin Lee, he still runs Feast. And Martin Lee would randomly heal homeless people that would come in seeking his services. And one of the people that he tries to heal is Eddie Brock. And you may be thinking, oh my god, Venom, Martin Lee, great. No, that's not what happens. What happens is that Eddie Brock has already been separated from the Venom symbiote. Mr. Negative's powers, combining with the Venom symbiote that's still fused inside of Eddie Brock's white blood cells, end up creating Anti-Venom. And Anti-Venom is amazing, because somehow Anti-Venom can not only negate the symbiote's powers, but also Spider-Man's, and that is fantastic. And also horrible. Mostly fantastic. So some of the biggest pains in the butt for Mr. Negative do end up turning out to be Anti-Venom and Spider-Man. And at one point, he actually is able to corrupt Spider-Man with his powers, which is very dangerous because I don't know if you know this, but having a corrupt Spider-Man on the payroll is actually a huge benefit in your favor. Because Spider-Man is incredibly powerful, the dude holds back all the time. He almost kills Betty Brant, which I know is not an incredible feat because Betty Brant is just a human. But the fact that the corrupting touch works so well that Spider-Man almost went through with it is impressive. Then you have Eddie Brock, who is determined to make sure the world knows that Mr. Negative is Martin Lee. So Mr. Negative has to constantly be on his toes to make sure that Eddie Brock can't somehow do that. Even though it doesn't work. He totally does that. Eddie Brock teams up with Wraith, and then Wraith is able to use some kind of software in her helmet to just facial recognition the crap out of Mr. Negative, and then everyone figures out that Mr. Negative is Martin Lee. It's amazing. But even when you don't have these huge big-time moments with Mr. Negative, you still have Mr. Negative showing up in other things. Like when he tried to take advantage of the Avengers vs. X-Men and is stopped by Spider-Woman and Hawkeye. Or when two X-Men that were trying to prove themselves and show that they can be heroes stumble into some plans of Mr. Negative and then they have to fight their way out. It's a whole thing. Everybody lives. It's okay. It's just Mr. Negative is everywhere and you can't really get rid of him. Now let's move on to my favorite part of the video. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, let's check out those powers because Mr. Negative is strong as fuck. Let's start off what I would consider the top of his power list, the mind control. This guy is able to use his powers to take over people's minds and make them do what he wants. It's called the corrupting touch. And there aren't many people that can fight this off. Plenty of people who are strong mentally, physically, it doesn't matter, become pawns of Mr. Negative. For example, Spider-Man is not even able to fight at all when he gets touched. White Dragon instantly touched, and White Dragon hated Mr. Negative. He's able to take control of the X-Men Rock Slide with just zero effort, and it's only until it's his own life in danger that he has to release Rock Slide. Some of the few people that have actually been able to resist his corrupting touch are Red Hood, for reasons unknown, and Shang-Chi, who is probably able to resist it because he is a martial arts master and has a very zen state of mind. And even though you don't really see him use this power as much, he can make people forget things using his powers. Like when he makes Aunt May forget Martin Lee executing one of the inner demons inside of Feast. Then we move on to his strength, and oh my goodness, this guy is just stupid strong. It's not even funny. You would think that he'd be on par with Spider-Man, right? Maybe even just a little bit stronger than Spider-Man. But no. Mr. Negative is definitely stronger than Spider-Man, and they prove that when Mr. Negative just palm thrusts Spider-Man through 2 buildings. Then we have Mr. Negative taking body shots from Anti-Venom like it's nothing, just shaking them off one by one. Then let's not forget when Mr. Negative himself said that a bullet to the head wouldn't be enough to stop this guy. Normally I would think, okay, it has to be somebody else, this guy's crazy, but no. The fact that he can somehow make his inner demons immortal, I definitely buy that. And I'll get back to that immortality thing in a second. Somehow the palm thrusting Spider-Man through 2 buildings thing isn't even my favorite, because when he fights Hammerhead, he's able to knock Hammerhead out with 1 nerve strike. Not only is Martin Lee incredibly strong, the guy knows martial arts beyond the human level. And then we also have the time that a building collapsed on top of Mr. Negative, and he just shakes it off. How? Why is this guy not a bigger deal? Seriously. And speaking of the whole beyond human martial arts thing, I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but Mr. Negative is able to cut bullets that Red Hood shoots at him. On top of that, he's able to throw his sword and cut Red Hood's gun in half. The accuracy, the amazing, just what? How? And then circling back to the immortality thing, you know that Mr. Negative has his henchmen, the inner demons. And the inner demons, for some reason, can't die unless Martin Lee wants them to. They've been turned to stone and then come back to life. They've been shot, they've been stabbed, and they have physical strength beyond that of normal people. And to make it even worse, they're able to imbue their weapons with the same crazy negative energy that Martin Lee is able to imbue with his own weapons. So, they're just incredibly deadly zombie kung fu ninjas that a lot of people probably can't handle. Conclusion, Martin Lee is someone that you just shouldn't fuck with. You should definitely just not mess with this guy. You should leave him alone, let him do his business if you're a regular human, because unless you're an Avenger, an X-Men, a Defender, whatever, unless you're on some kind of team, I don't think you should be messing with this guy. He is not street-level villain material. This guy is insane, he is crazy, he has an army, he can make an army, and it's just not a good idea to mess with him. But let me know what you guys think about Mr. Negative now that you know more about him and what this guy is capable of. Put everything down in the comment section below, guys. Let me hear your thoughts. And if you're brand new, hit the subscribe button, stick around. Check out the other videos on the channel. And don't forget to hit the bell notification so you can keep up with new videos coming out. And if you guys ever want to make requests, you can follow me on social media in the description down below. I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.